Today's guest is Compass sales manager Jared Fleischer. Jared was one of our earlier guests on the podcast, and we thought it'd be fun to have Jared back. He's our first returning guest. And we're going to talk about what's happened in 2023 real estate, how are our predictions, and where do we think we're going to go for the rest of the year. Welcome to the podcast. Well, I wanted to have you back on the show.
Well, I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, and you're my first repeat guest.
Woohoo.
And we talked first time.
Does I get a shot of bourbon for that?
Would you like a shot of bourbon? We have mugs just for that purpose. And some of our guests do like to have a drink. So
do they?
Nice. Yeah, of course. It's already afternoon.
I mean, we have a bar cart in there.
I know. Mm-hmm. I learned an expression in our team meeting today that somebody says, "Oh, I was doing 12-ounce curls." And I was like, "What?" And I thought about it, and I said, "Oh, so you were drinking beer out of a can?" And they're like, "Yep."
Correct.
So that was pretty funny. But no, so you're our first repeat guest.
Well, thank you for having me.
The first time you were here, we talked a lot about the real estate market. Mm-hmm. And now it's the middle of 2023.
When was I here? What time?
I think you were probably the first week of the year.
Okay.
Right?
I didn't remember.
We usually film a week or so in advance.
We've had a lot of stuff happen since then.
So a lot has happened, and I thought it'd be fun to recap, maybe assess some of our predictions.
Okay.
And see what you think is going to happen the rest of the year.
All right.
Because it feels kind of like a crazy year. Maybe that's just me personally, but it feels like things are not as expected.
Okay.
So how would you describe 2023 so far?
It's over like a 30,000 foot view. It's tough sometimes because you just have all these different areas. I mean, we have such a big, metroplex.
Right.
I'd say it's, I think overall it's running towards what the expectation was, and that's a reduction in total number of sales. Mm-hmm. Still some increase in pricing because there still seems to be the demand for the good homes.
Yeah.
And that inventory seems to be fewer and further between. The inventory numbers seem to have gone up, as we had talked about.
Yeah, they are up.
But it doesn't
not like
seem
I hoped.
Not a ton, but it's, you go back 12 to 18 months when we had a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So having 2.5 months is an improvement, but it seems the buyers are very particular about what they're willing to pay a premium for, considering the rate environment we're in.
I think that's the problem.
I think it's the biggest.
Buyer expectations are way higher now. Mm-hmm. It's like, well, I'm going to pay 6% or 7%, and my friend did it for 2.8% 2 years ago,
right,
and paid less money, and so I want to get the best house,
right? Yeah, I think they're being a little bit more discerning and really kind of honing in on the things they really need and want. So
I was thinking some of ours are just being picky, but
yeah,
maybe
probably
there's some of that.
But I think overall, I think it feels like the market is healthy, if that's the right word. Yeah. I don't think it's falling off a cliff by any means. But naturally, you're going to see some attrition in what we had from 21 and 22, just because you can't sustain that. So
those were unicorn years.
Yeah, they were, right. They're
now people think that's normal,
right? And hopefully now, we'll call it a year past the shift we all felt in the market. The change in activity was about this time. It was May, June of last year. We're a year into that, so hopefully there's some normalcy and some cyclical part of the market starting to kind of resonate with people. It seems to me, you tell me, I'm not meeting with sellers like you, but it seems to me that maybe sellers are past the FOMO part of I missed out and kind of realizing, all right, this isn't 2021 or 2022. Yes. I do have to be a little bit realistic. Sellers are always going to want to overprice by and large.
Yes.
But I feel like we're far enough removed from the craziness that they realize, okay, like that market is kind of gone, that buyers willing to pay anything for anything. Now I think it's more, hey, you've got a really great house, really great location, things buyers are looking for, anticipate getting a premium. But if you don't, anticipate your activity maybe not being as busy as you'd hope, and having to really kind of think about what your strategy is. Do you want to move your house quick? Are you willing to wait and see?
Right. I think a lot of people don't know either. Mm-hmm. We've had some listings this summer that have had multiple offers, and been great, and others that I thought would be really good, but they've stagnated. Part of that could have been a little bit of the time, but neighborhoods make a big difference too.
I think so.
I think you're right that a seller needs to have their house looking good.
100%.
I say that every month in my market report. I mean, it was true last year. The last year, if you had your house looking great, it was like rocket fuel. You get 15% more. This year, maybe you just get more and you get all the terms you want.
Yeah.
But this is a real challenge right now, I think, is the inventory. There's theoretically more homes, but the ones that are really attractive to buyers are cycling in and on and off the market very quickly, and so everything else feels stale.
Right, and to your point about presentation, because buyers consume this data all day long on their phones and their digital devices, if it doesn't look great or something really stands out, like, oh, look at this amazing backyard, or it looks like it's got a great floor plan, or it's just even clean and organized and finished out, I think people are just passing them.
They just don't even want to go see it.
They don't even want to see it. Where in 21, like anything that came on the market, because we have to see it. Like, it may not be perfect, but we recognize that if we don't see this house, there's going to be 50 other people, if not more, that are going to.
This house will sell no matter what.
Correct.
Here's our chance to get something in our budget.
Right. Rates are really low. Maybe it's not ideal, but we can do it. Now, I think if it doesn't check a lot of the boxes, it's just not even getting shown. And I think that's what you're seeing in the stats. You see the number of showings has decreased dramatically, a couple 100%.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I mean, showings, getting 30 or 40 people per listing showings. Now you're getting 7, 10.
Yeah. I think that's also a problem because people see that data on its own and they want to think there's a problem. And it's like, well, no, the house is still selling.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's tricky. What surprised you most about this year besides buyer preferences, if you will?
I maybe expected there to be, I'll tell you what, maybe not from a housing perspective, more maybe from an economic perspective. I did expect that we would kind of be past the continued Fed rate increases. I kind of expected that to drop off really in the first quarter. That was, I'm not an economist, I don't have any data to suggest that, but it just felt like, okay, there needed to be a course correction made, and that's what the Fed was trying to do to try to slow inflation and kill demand a little bit. So, we get back to some normalcy. But I was kind of surprised that we're continuing, and we had a pause, and then they went back up again. And then they're saying we're going to go back up.
I saw rates hit the 7s last week.
Right. So,
which long term is really not that big of a deal.
Of course.
It's short term, it's hard for people to
It's shocking when it's 12 months and you've over doubled what they were, So I think that's a little bit of maybe a surprise. I kind of maybe expected them to have an opportunity to get back into the 5s this year for mortgage rates. I don't see that as a possibility at all. I think even maybe next year will be a challenge. I think it's all going to depend on what the Fed's economic position is going to be, what inflation looks like. So that maybe is a little bit of a surprise, but I think the market in general, we were forecasting as a company nationally a 25% decrease in market activity.
Interesting.
A total number of just homes sold
is
what our national prediction was from our CEO, Robert Refkin. And in some markets, it is that, and even exceeding that, and maybe some more like the coastal markets that are a little bit more volatile. The coastal markets can fluctuate a ton depending on what's going on with the economy. While we're a big market, we have a lot of good economic diversity, still have massive continued population growth. So here, it could be 10% in some areas, it could be 15%, but really I think we're hovering around that like kind of 7-8% rate for drop.
Yeah,
which I think is pretty good.
I think it is good too, and I don't think that's bad news.
No.
It certainly seems like bad news, but there are fewer. For most of the year, there's been fewer homes for sale.
That's right.
So I don't think fewer homes selling. When I looked at the numbers for DFW last month, I figured it was about 9% decrease in market activity. Now, people look at different parts of the metro. So somebody could say 12, somebody could say 6.
Sure.
But let's just say it's 10 to keep it simple. I don't think it's that there's buyer demand is down 10%. I think there's just fewer options for a buyer to choose from. I think the buyer demand is still pretty strong.
I agree with that statement too. And I think for sellers looking at that and thinking, oh man, if 10% drop, my house is worth less than it was. That's not necessarily true.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So when you take it's there's got to be some quantifying to that data. The quantifying is, we're 10% down total number of homes sold.
Right.
Right. But that doesn't mean the value of homes has dropped 10%.
No, prices are up.
Yeah. So most places.
Well, most places are up. Like Plano, where we are now, prices are up. And if you look at the metro area, then they're going to say median prices are down. But again, I don't think a person who bought a house a year ago is going to sell it for any less than they paid. I think they'll sell it for more than they paid a year ago. So home values, I think, are up. But the mix, I mean, I do think less activity in the high end is going to bring the median down.
Right.
But that's constantly left out in the news story. So people are like,
I know you hear, like the one I've heard of several times over the course of the last several weeks is, we continue this historic decrease in market activity. But there's no context to it, right? They're just looking at, okay, year over year, do you see in some markets, again, a 20 to 25% decrease in number of homes sold? Normally, no. You don't. Right. That's not a normal year over year. But what they're not giving in context is the increase year over year for 2 years on top of the price increases year over year. So they're not giving that context to say, hey, we had this unprecedented cycle where it was crazy. Naturally, when we got back to some normalcy of, human existence and living, people living their lives normally again, national and, global economic markets, kind of cooling, it's just kind of a natural pullback.
Yeah.
But that's not talked about.
No.
Yeah.
No, the sky is falling.
It doesn't sell
subscriptions. It doesn't keep you on the website so you can sell more ads. So it's a challenge.
Yeah.
So generally speaking, you think the market's pretty good.
I do.
In DFW.
I 100% think the market, and I continue to think that we are poised, and that's the one stat you do see is, Texas markets, the big markets in Texas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio, and DFW continue to see among the most influx of population, continue to see strongest demand for market. Look at all the businesses that continue to expand into these markets too.
Yeah.
All these different, there's not only, corporate moves here, but independent, chains that are expanding to different parts. Yeah. I mean, everybody's like, we want to be in Austin. Oh, we want to be in Dallas, right? We want to be there. So that is always going to lend itself to us having a pretty good market.
One of my guests earlier this year had talked about Dallas is a great place to test out new business concepts. And I hadn't thought about it, but he's like, it's a very diverse economy. It's a healthy economy. So there's disposable income. And he's like, rent is way cheaper. Mm-hmm. So like if it's a restaurant, like why test out the concept in New York City or LA where rent is expensive and there's going to be all these extra regulations? Let's test the concept in Dallas where it's more affordable.
Makes sense.
And then if it works, we can roll it out to the other areas that are higher cost.
Yeah.
And I thought, that's a really good perspective that I hadn't thought about before.
Yeah,
Lots of businesses, I think,
absolutely.
Think this way to get employees a little more affordably, and employees can have a great life because housing isn't as atrocious.
Well, and commuting's not as much of a challenge here as it is in a lot of bigger cities too. Right?
True. It does seem worse driving on Dallas North Tollway now compared to a year ago, but it's certainly not LA, that's for sure.
Yes, like traffic is bad, but there's availability for, we'll call it affordable living for people nearby. Whereas in some of the bigger markets like that, where some of these places are located in the heart of the metropolitan area, people can't afford to live there and work in those places. Right. So they have to commute really far away.
Yeah, we're pretty fortunate in that regards.
I think so.
So summing up, kind of talking about, hey, what's going on in the market right now? We talked about home sales, number of homes sold is down. Home prices, we've kind of summarized there. Depending on who you ask, they're probably up.
I think so.
Certainly if you look in the categories. And then inventory, like there's more inventory now than before. Mm-hmm. Is it a buyer's market though?
I mean, I wouldn't categorize it as a buyer's market like across the board. I wouldn't say that.
Yeah.
Are there opportunities for buyers? Yes. Yeah. Right. And I think you have to take it into context. Coming out of what we came out of, there was no opportunities for buyers to really have much firm footing on, things they wanted to ask for in a negotiation situation. It was kind of like, well, here's what we're going to do. You can either do it or don't do it from a seller perspective. Yeah. And buyers were willing to do everything, right? I mean, you saw how crazy it got in some of the people offering. I mean, there was some really, really interesting structured contracts with stuff
sure you
outside
saw way more than me. Yeah.
Stuff outside of real estate that buyers were offering, to sellers to, I mean, personal property, all
Let's
sorts
hear
of
the
crazy
things
stuff.
that you thought were the weirdest, because you've
one of them
seen
was-
this more at the brokerage or market level.
One of them was when I was in Lakewood. One of them was offering to pay for a year membership for the seller at Lakewood Country Club. I mean,
that's a lot of money.
That's a lot of money, you know. I mean, because they were already members, but they're like, we'll pay your dues for a year. You know, because the initiation fee is ridiculous, but you know, the membership fee, $45,000-$50,000, just base membership fee for a year. One of them was, I mean, this is 7-figure price point homes,
right? Which they already were probably bidding up by like 100, 200, 300,000.
Correct. I mean,
plus to pay the country club dues.
Correct. The biggest one I saw in Lakewood was 600,000 over the list price.
Wow.
Yeah. So
those days are gone.
Those days are gone. Yeah. That seller got out while the getting was good.
Yeah.
But yeah, just stuff like that. You know, I mean, I didn't see this specifically, but I've heard stories about cars being offered. I mean, different things that are outside of the scope of contract. Because at some point you hit so many levers you can pull in a contract.
There's only so many lines.
So people are like, well, what else can we offer the seller to get him to take our offer?
Right.
You know? But that part, so getting back to the question, no, I don't think it's necessarily a buyer's market. If you look at pricing and you look at, you know, percentage of price obtained in a sale comparative to list price, it's still pretty close to 100%.
Right. Sellers pretty much get what they want.
Sellers are still pretty much getting that.
Not like last year where they got way more than they ever imagined.
Right. You know, we were averaging 10% above list price at the kind of apex last spring.
Yeah.
You know, now we're, you know, anywhere from 96, 97 to 100%. Some people getting over a little bit, but sellers are still really getting pretty close to what they're asking.
Right. So when does this conversation shift to when we're like, yeah, it's more of a buyer's market?
Well, I think there's got to be a lot more inventory. I think number one, that's
like not 2 months of supply.
No, there's probably needs to be 4.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't think you hear in the news 6 months is a balanced market. And we've talked about this. I don't think that's going to exist.
Maybe not in DFW.
Not here, no. I mean, maybe in some outlying areas where you don't have as much population and there may be some building and it's taking time to build up to that. But I don't foresee us ever getting to that anywhere in the near future. So I think double the inventory we have now, you know, go from 2 to 4. Yeah. That will definitely take away that supply and demand part will definitely, I think, lower pricing. Buyers will have a little bit more. But then if rates drop again, I think that will bring a lot of buyers out of the woodwork. I think that'll send demand back higher. And we could just, not going to be in the same boat I think we were 2 years ago or last year. But I think that it's going to be a pretty good market for sellers.
There's a lot of people sitting on the sidelines.
I think there are.
Yeah.
What do you think? Do you think you have a lot of, your buyers sitting on the sidelines?
Yeah, there's a lot of people that are waiting for something to happen. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that they can truly clearly articulate what they're waiting for.
Okay.
Some people will say, well, I'm waiting, prices are going to fall. Well, if the data doesn't support that prices are going to fall, not in a meaningful way, or I'm waiting for rates to drop. But again, not like there's no data that would say they're going to drop in a meaningful way anytime soon. We might move from 6.5 to 6 and their payment changed $150 a month. But that's, to me, not the real reason why they're not wanting to move. So they're like kind of waiting for something that I think there's just uncertainty. People have a hard time articulating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
They're not sure about.
I think people try to time markets. It's really hard.
Real estate is not going to work. Like you can't trade in and trade out of houses like you can a stock or other commodities or assets.
Yeah, it's typically a long-term hold, right? It's a long-term play. And you might have an opportunity that you get some short-term returns that we just had
we had the last couple of years.
But you can't time that. So I think there, you probably have a bucket of different types of buyers, the ones who have the need or the absolute desire to maybe get their first home, and they're willing to overlook these factors that they see as maybe negatives, rates, prices, whatever that is. But then you probably have a huge sector of buyer that, to your point, is like, well, I'm going to wait. I keep hearing this, things are going to go down, but there's really no empirical evidence that shows that
going to happen.
Right?
I always, in my life, I believe all things are possible, but doesn't make them probable. That's I think, one of the challenges that I'm seeing with a lot of our buyers is they're waiting for something.
Yeah.
I do worry, to your point, about the first-time buyer that wants to get a home. The people that are waiting, I have a huge concern they're just going to get priced out of the market. Like I always think about maybe entry-level price point like 300s. Well, those are disappearing in Collin County. And so now they're up, and then they're not going to come back. That's my my thinking. So
yeah, that price point's not coming down.
Yeah. So those people should just take. This sounds terrible, but my mom used to always say things like beggars can't be choosers, right? Like this is what the dinner is. So I also think that way a little bit with real estate. Look, your budget's $350. Like buy something. Like make it how you want. Get a go okay neighborhood. Make it how you want.
Right.
And then take your equity in a couple years and buy something else that you can be pickier for.
Right.
Unless if you know in your life that you're going to have a big change in your financial status, then sure, go ahead and wait for that to happen. Or maybe there's inheritance coming or there's a business deal happening. Sure, I think then that's a pretty smart reason to wait. But otherwise, I think it's just delaying the inevitable.
It is, yeah. They're waiting on what, right? Yeah, like what's, like you said, the other shoe I don't think is going to drop.
Yeah.
And I think I think that's great advice to a buyer is that this is a long-term play, right? And the whole point is, and yes, there's certainly the investment side of it, but really if you're wanting to have home ownership, you're planning to start a family, whatever it is,
all the intangibles,
all those reasons, just it's better now to get in, because things at the end of the day, the historics of it only increases.
Yeah. Well, there's also scarcity. Like we can't, if you want to live in Plano, I mean, we can't make Plano bigger.
No.
Right. Like
the old adage, they're not making any more of it, right?
Right.
Land.
They're not making any more. And there's not a lot of new construction in some places either.
Yeah. What do you see with that right now? I'm curious. Since I don't go out to a lot of these communities, are builders meeting their deadlines and timelines to build? Are they taking longer?
We haven't done a lot of new construction contracts on our team recently. Well, actually, we have one right now, but the home is already under construction and the completion date's coming up in weeks. And so we bought it with the timeline pretty established.
Okay.
My general perception is that builders are delivering on time now.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
Maybe past some of the issues with material, labor.
But it's funny, they didn't reduce their prices.
Yeah.
People were like, hey, I'll just wait until lumber prices go down. And I'm like, well, if people are willing to pay that price now, do you think the builder's going to just graciously lower their prices when lumber goes down? No, they're not.
No. They've baked that in now. Now it's just like, okay, well, this is just how it is.
Now, builders, I think I'm seeing a lot of incentives that builders do, but it's just a math game. It kind of disappoints me because it tricks buyers a little bit. Like, oh, you buy this house, we're going to give you this, we're going to give you this rate buy down. We're going to give you all these financing incentives. But then when you actually look at the financing, there's like a huge amount of fees that were in there. So they just kind of like did some padding on to the greatest extent they could legally do.
Right.
They more or less padded all their costs. So they just like the take back. They never really gave much.
Yeah.
But the buyers, I think, get seduced into that sometimes.
Sure. It's kind of a good analogy I've seen is like with the car market right now. Like car dealerships are, you couldn't find a car during COVID. The used car market went crazy. Yeah. I mean, people were paying insane amounts of money, and not just used, new cars
crazy
too.
about everything, but cars were another.
Cars were another one, and now you're seeing if you drive by, any kind of American manufacturer type, Chevy, Ford. Look at the amount of trucks and SUVs they have on their lots. So they've got all this inventory that was backlogged, that was waiting for chips, and they were stuck on, giant boats or whatever, and then they got delivered, but now the demand has changed dramatically.
Well, think about the costs. If mortgage rates are 6, then getting an interest rate on a car must be like 8, 9, 10.
Yeah, I don't even want to think about it.
So I don't want to think about that either.
Yeah, but it's the next closest thing, and it just reminds me of that, builders, to your point, they are... they've not maybe adjusted their prices, but they will give incentives to move inventory,
They don't have to right now, though, so they don't have to give a lot of incentives.
Okay.
In the back half of the year, I'm really curious what that looks like. Because every month I do see, there are more homes for sale now, just a raw number of homes. And, we're in kind of midsummer, like kind of dog days of summer. There are more homes for sale. Builders, I think, have generally sold out on their stuff, but some of them are building spec homes just because they didn't want to deal with not being able to meet delivery timelines. So they just built the product and build it, they'll come. And largely that's been true. They're able to sell it. But I don't know what that looks like in the back half of the year. Like builders could be more competitive like we saw at the end of 2022.
Yes.
Where they were willing to do a lot more to get those homes sold.
Yeah. Well, they get them off their books, lose the carrying cost, lose the tax liability.
Yeah, this is a business. It's not a home that somebody's living in. People forget that.
Correct. Right. So, I mean, I think that's probably a good point. There probably will be some deals if a builder's carrying some inventory that they're ready to get rid of. But I don't know.
I don't think it's still a deal though when they're like, "Hey, this house is $750. We'll give it to you for $700."
Oh yeah, and it was.
But we were offering this floor plan for $650 a year ago.
Right. It should be less than that. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you a real estate agent listening to this podcast? Our team is growing. To find out more about joining a fun, service-minded team, go to hastingsre.com/careers. That's HAISTINGSRE.com/careers.
We are in the normally the slower part of the summer.
Yeah.
That's what the history says about July and August. And it has certainly, from an outward appearance perspective, slowed from just a activity perspective.
Like number of homes being sold.
Number of homes being sold, number of showings happening at homes. Even in this office, talking to some other agents, have decent inventory that they expected to get a certain amount of activity on, and it's not really aligning with what their expectation was.
Right.
So we get out of the summer and we get back into the fall, and you normally have a little bit of an uptick in activity in the early fall before the holiday. So it will be interesting to see, because last year it was just decreasing because we were coming off that spike. This year it's we had a decrease in the winter, we had an increase in the spring and the early summer. Now we're kind of activity slowing again. So does it pick back up again in the fall? That'll be, I think, the litmus test to see if we're back to some real seasonality in the market.
Yeah. So thinking backwards in your history, like what does that seasonality look like in DFW?
Well, in DFW, if you look historically, May and June have always been the highest closing months. Most number of homes sold in the market. And then July and August pull back a little bit. But then
still pretty healthy activity.
Still pretty healthy, 100%.
But pull back from those spring peaks.
Yeah, because you have the majority of the showing and contracting and pending action happening in March, April, May. And then it slows a little bit in July and August in terms of just number of people who are putting homes under contract. But then the hope is that you see a little bit of an influx of inventory, number one, in the fall. It's typically kind of post Labor Day is the timeline you're using. You see good closing activity for the next 45 to 60 days. And then it kind of slows in early November. It slows down. And normally November is actually a slower month of activity and closings than December. You'd be surprised how busy December can be.
I've had some busy December. I think people want to, they want to start their kids in school the next year, or they want to finish the home selling project. I have found December to be surprisingly busy month in real estate.
Yeah, it normally falls. It normally falls like in the half, in the top half
always. Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see what the rest of this year looks like. Personally, overall, I'm pretty bullish on DFW real estate market.
I agree.
But I predict the future, I probably won't be a real estate agent. So we'll see what happens. But what are your biggest concerns?
Biggest concerns, I think still number one is just got to be good available inventory. It seems to be a concern just for some buyers, that to get some of these buyers to move, it's got to be the right inventory to get them to move. Rates are what they are. I don't see a big increase in that. I don't think they're all of a sudden going to spike even higher. They might fluctuate between 6.5 and 7.25, whatever that is.
They've largely been stable for the last 6 months.
They've been pretty stable for the last 6 months.
They're kind of in a band, like a 1% range. People get in the low 6s and 7, but I haven't seen anything crazy happening. So that's almost a boring story now. Like when it gets to 7, be like, but you're like, well, your payment went up $50 a month, but now it's 6.25 or 6.75. And so it seems like we haven't had any activity really far up or really far down. Right. So you think that continues?
I do. Yeah, I think that continues. So, and activity does flow. I mean, even if you look at when rates were lower, they fluctuated. You could get all the way down to 2.75, 2 7/8. Some people paid more to get or got 15 years at 2.5.
Right.
But they were pretty firm and held pretty firm around 3.5 for a while, right? So you had a fluctuation down there. They could pop back up to 4. So I think the fluctuations are always going to be in that percentage bandwidth you talk about. But that would be, honestly, that to me is still kind of the number one factor, is just available inventory.
And I think it's related to the rates like you talked about. Like a seller who has a mortgage at 2.5, 3.5, they have to have a compelling reason to move, right? Because their payment's probably going up.
Yeah, probably quite a bit.
So their reason to move needs to be pretty good.
I think so.
And I think that challenge is going to exist for a little while.
Yeah. And I think, and then the other thing, going to the second half of the year, you talked a little bit about buyers just not really knowing. I think that could, why they're not doing anything. I think that could continue for a lot of buyers through the fall and winter market. So I don't know how many more new buyers you're going to pick up in that market cycle.
It's hard to know.
So if buyers are waiting for something, a lot of those probably won't make a decision at that point. So they're going to get pushed again, and you're not getting this influx of maybe newer buyers that are all of a sudden coming in saying, oh yeah, I want to buy, at this time of year. Certainly there's going to be need for, people, but that would be it, is just that I think the buyers are going to continue to kind of sit on their hands a little bit and see what happens. And that could very well drag into next year.
Yeah. And that will mean that inventory will also start to rise as the buyer demand stays stable or soft.
Right.
And then sellers keep needing or wanting to sell. So the inventory may finally creep up at the end of the year.
Yeah. I'd be surprised if we didn't have more inventory when the market kind of starts to pick back up in the spring of 2024. I'd be pretty surprised if we weren't at, more inventory than we were, right now. And even this past spring, I'd be pretty surprised.
Yeah. And inventory is local too. That's the tricky part. Like in Collin County, some of these cities still only have like 1.3, 1.5 months of supply. But across the whole metro, it's inching up every month.
It is.
I like that for buyers. Again, for buyers, like, okay, now there's some more choices. You don't have to give away everything. You can keep some of your rights in the contract.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? So what advice would you give to a seller?
I think the biggest thing a seller can do right now is just, number one, have reasonable expectations. Really consult with your agent. Hopefully you've hired Matt or somebody.
Another great Compass agent.
Yes, somebody on Matt's team.
Thank you.
And they understand what's happening. Like, educating sellers is so important. I think there's probably a lot of agents out there who aren't in tune with what's happening in the market. They might think they are, but they really don't analyze the data. And it's not all about, it's not all about data, but really that's the biggest metric to, a definition of what's happening. So I think preparing the seller with reasonable expectations on what can happen. I know a lot of times it's you don't really know, especially as you're changing activities in a market, it's hard to determine what's going to happen. So I think educating them and then, making them understand what's, finding their priority. Is their priority to, try to get the highest and best dollar, maybe put some money into their house if they need to get that, because that's what buyers seem to be paying a premium for. Do they want to achieve a quick sale and, kind of roll the dice there and see what happens? So I think just the education process for sellers and making sure that they are putting their best foot forward for whatever their scenario is, as opposed to somebody just kind of coming in and ramming home, this is it, right? This is what your house is worth. Well, maybe there's an opportunity here to improve it and get a little bit more. Maybe let's really look at, okay, there's some disrepair, maybe there isn't, that we need to take a look at. So I think it's really just an education process.
And so the agent then needs to be an advisor.
100%.
Unfortunately, I love bashing real estate agents sometimes, but unfortunately, I think it's a little bit the real estate Hunger Games. As the number of transactions has gone down, some people are really desperate to get that listing or that deal.
That's a great analogy.
And I think some agents are telling sellers whatever they can to get the listing. Perhaps maybe not knowing, or maybe knowing full well that they're not giving them the best advice or the best approach, and then these listings sit and everybody gets frustrated. Yeah, and it doesn't do good for the marketplace. But no, I think some of that's happening. What advice would you give to a buyer?
I think I would give to a buyer, if this is something you're wanting to do, if you really have a desire to purchase, a need to purchase, don't let an interest rate scare you away. Don't let that happen. Really kind of be open to the thought and possibilities of maybe different types of properties that don't fit right within your perfect confines. Right. And it's okay to have a property that might need a little bit of work, that maybe doesn't have the one of the features you want. You can't find, no house is perfect. There's no perfect house. And so I think for some buyers, it's just maybe coming to that understanding, and it's okay. and that the market is a long-term, owning a home is a long-term play from an investment standpoint.
Yep.
That's certainly a factor when you're buying real estate, but really you should be, in my opinion, be focusing on what your need is and what your wants are.
Yeah.
And the valuation part of it and the investment part of it will come.
Right.
That's going to happen.
It's going to happen over time.
Yeah.
A rising tide lifts all boats.
That's right.
People forget this is a 5, 7, 10-year investment I'm making.
Yeah. Let's not forget. I honestly don't know what the statistic is today, but that was the number when I got into real estate, 20 years ago. That was the number. People live in their homes an average of, 6 to 8 years, 7 to 10 years.
I've heard it's going up.
Yeah. So
I
maybe
haven't researched the statistics, but it's believable.
Yeah.
That people refinance. They got,
right.
They they remodeled the house during COVID, and now they're pretty happy. They're probably going to stay even longer.
Yeah. I think, and there's so much opportunity now to take your current home and renovate it and change it and make it what you need.
Right.
Like personally me, I've got a 1-story, house that I would love to be bigger, and, I could add on to it if, we wanted to do that pretty easily. And there's a lot of opportunity to do that as opposed to going to selling it and buying a new one.
Yeah. They have to be willing to do that work.
You do.
I tell buyers, to your point, you can have a great house in a great location, or you can get a good deal. Pick two.
Okay.
Right, because buyers, I think, to your point about maybe they're being a little picky or they're not wanting to give things up. They're like, well, I want to have a really good deal because rates are high, and I want to be in the best schools, and I also want to have a brand new house that's perfect. And it's like, well, you can't have all of those things. Like the best house in the best neighborhood, people are always going to pay a premium for that.
Right.
So maybe we can flex on one of those. Most people can't flex on their budget, so then they need to flex on either the house or the location. I'm always more biased towards pick the best neighborhood because you can't change that.
Right.
You can tear down that house.
Sure.
But you cannot change your neighborhood.
Yeah,
You're kind of locked in on that.
That's right. Yeah, neighborhoods don't just change overnight either. Like they don't just all of a sudden go from,
especially for buying a great one. There's
Correct.
a lot of momentum that's going to keep it great.
Correct. Yeah. And then there's some that that come up, right? They have a turnover, generational turnover, and so you have a new generation of people that move in there, and maybe the schools weren't the focus at that point because there wasn't a ton of attendance from
there was a family.
Right. And that happened in the neighborhood I was coming out of. Is when we moved into it in 2007, there were not a lot of people our age, and then by the time we left it in 2018, there was tons of people our age. So it turned, and then the school wasn't the best, rating wise. It was a fine school,
right?
But the ratings wise, but by the time we left it, the rating had almost doubled. In the 10 years we were there.
Yeah, so that's the crazy thing that people forget about. Yeah. Again, real estate can be slow moving.
It can be very slow moving. It takes something like a pandemic to make it move really fast.
Now that we're out of that,
right?
Thank heavens.
Thank heavens for sure.
People are stressing out because it's still pretty fast, but it feels slow compared to that. So we talked advice for sellers, advice for buyers. What advice would you give to agents in the market right now?
I think for agents right now, you just really got to lean into the work that's required to build a sustainable business. Like really, I think you really got to lean into like, hey, I'm running a business and we're going to start to see these more cyclical times. I got to really be prepared, have a pipeline built, have systems built out so I can run my business when it's, when the going's great and even when it's slower. This is a people business, and that is the commodity, maybe real estate, but it is a business all about relationships.
Yeah. And people are living their lives in this commodity.
That's right. And so I think the really successful agents can be chameleon-like, and they can adapt to the markets. And so I think one of the things we had talked about in our last podcast was, as the market was going to pull back a little bit, what would that do to the realtor population? Would it thin it out? Would there be more people coming in? I think what you're seeing, and if you take a look at some of the market share, the bigger firms that have the more experienced, more productive agents, more professional agents, kind of
taking market share.
They're taking market share. You're starting to see a lot of the smaller, and I'm not taking away from any of these places, but some of the ones that have part-time agents, that's kind of what they take, are kind of starting to fall by the wayside. Some the iBuyer model is practically gone.
Yeah.
I mean, pretty much everybody who was doing that, except Open Doors, kind of like the lone holdout.
I know. I thought they were going to go bankrupt this year.
They're
hanging on.
They're hanging in, but
they got a good brand though. So
they do.
There's power in a brand.
They do. Because they were kind of the first big player there, and so then everybody jumped on that bandwagon. Well, all those companies that jumped on that had another revenue source basically folded shop pretty quickly when the market shifted. So I think that's the advice for, I think, agents is really partnering with a brand, a company that has the things you need to be successful. Or if you're an independent broker, making sure you have those things in place, because I think buyers and sellers want to know the person they're hiring to represent them does have all these things that they can use to present their property or find properties that are going to set them apart.
I think that's what the hypothesis the iBuyer model had, was that people don't care. And now we're saying, hey, iBuyers are kind of going by the wayside. So they care to some extent. That's important to them.
Yeah, I think so too.
And that trust. It's a big financial decision for most people.
It is.
And being able to feel comfortable with it and know that they're getting good advice
it's important, I think. And we live in an age now where it just seems that people get taken advantage of, for all sorts of different types of things.
Yeah.
And so I really believe that the person that you choose to hire as a real estate agent, I mean, it's an extension of kind of what your thought process is and kind of how you view the world, right? You want somebody that kind of sees it through your window and that can be that person for you, so you don't have to worry about all those things. And some of those things you don't know about the process, so you have somebody who would, who treats you the way they would do it for themselves.
And they know the road ahead, so they can guide you.
That's right.
Yeah, a great real estate transaction is when the client was like, that was easy.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, yeah,
it's supposed to be.
It should be easy.
Right?
It doesn't have to be hard.
Typically, you just have to sign on stuff and give people your money.
Yeah, and if you're getting good advice and you take it, then it's a nice path towards your goal.
That's right.
Otherwise, you can have a TikTok show or whatever about how miserable it was because you didn't follow advice, or you picked a clown or something else.
Since you're pretty, let me ask you that question. Since you're, kind of on the cutting edge and forefront of, incorporating.
I'm flattered.
Well, you are. Like, I don't know a whole lot of other DFW realtors that have YouTube channels and do podcasts all the time and have good content and, really focusing on delivering that to the consumer. Have you seen the realtor presence in, social media maybe wane a little bit because of the, we'll call it change in the market again?
I have to confess, I don't pay too much attention to what the other agents are doing. Maybe I should.
Well, I didn't. I mean,
there's plenty of business for all of us.
Sure.
And so I'm not really sure what agents are doing. I do think a play that a lot of agents keep trying to run is like, look at how great I am. Look at all the houses I sold. And I think that more like less on the YouTube or like video, but more on like social media, like Facebook, Instagram.
Right.
People just kind of keep running that same play. Look at all the business I'm doing. And I just don't think people care about that as much anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, it frustrates me as an agent. I'm like, well, that's great. And it's funny too, because sometimes there are agents that I have followed on social media and I perceived they were doing a ton of business. And then when I actually realize or look them up, I'm like, oh, they don't really do very much business. Like they're really good at painting that picture, which may or may not work for consumers, but it's an old play that maybe I'm tired of.
I gotcha.
So I don't know that I answered your question. I think I just
that makes sense.
Skated by it.
That's all good.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears for a second. It's the dog days of summer, July. It's hot. You were born and raised in Dallas area. What's advice? How does one stay cool in this this weather?
I don't know. That's a good question. Number one, I guess make sure you have an efficient AC system.
So I hope you followed that advice and serviced it year round.
Correct. Yeah. Make sure you get your service year round. Man, it's tough. It is hard. I find myself just not going out as much.
Yeah.
It is really tough. I'm so accustomed to it that it doesn't affect me a ton. And I'm not saying I'm any different than anybody, but I've grown up here. So I just look at it like, oh, well, we lucked out last year. Last year was pretty mild. This year's not.
Right.
So it's just kind of part and parcel for being a part of it here. But there's plenty of, activity and things to do in this city that don't revolve around having to be outside.
Eating out.
A lot of
Movies.
them. A lot of them still do.
What are your favorite summer activities?
I'm old, man. I don't do anything fun anymore.
They did the kids' activities.
Oh, I mean, it's standard stuff for everybody. I mean, we love going to the pool, doing stuff, water parks. Matter of fact, we were just talking about, going, taking my kids to a water park in a couple of weeks. They're pretty lame, actually, to be honest. My kid, I have the digital revolution kid that just, all they want to do
they're
is...
smart. They stay in the AC.
They stay in the AC. They want a game. They want to watch YouTube and do those things. So I wish I had better advice and was more hip on like what were the cool things to do.
What were the cool things when you were young?
Like when I was a kid,
yeah,
or
a
like
teenager,
a young
or
adult.
early 20s.
Oh, I mean, it was, oh man, a teenager, and they're like, well, just going out.
Oh, just going out. Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't a super. I'll freely admit I wasn't super into like trying a bunch of new things and finding out like all the city had to offer. One thing we've got great museums here in Dallas Fort Worth.
I never take advantage of that.
I mean, the DMA is amazing. The National Sculpture Center is amazing. The Kimball in Fort Worth, the Modern in Fort Worth. So those are some opportunities, and inside.
Yeah.
We really are becoming a place that's, and even Cowboy Stadium has a great art collection that you can view without having to go to a football game.
Yeah.
I mean,
I forgot about that.
Jerry Jones's wife is a super art collector, and she's curated like this whole art collection in the stadium.
Interesting.
But we have some culture in the city. There are some cool things to do that don't revolve around having to be out on a patio when it's 105 degrees.
Yeah.
So, but all that being said, I think there's just, even during these times of year, is when you really try to take advantage of everything the outdoors has to offer and just hope that you survive it.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I think, well, this time you're always reminded why the affluent families own a home in Colorado.
There you go.
Because they just leave.
Yeah.
They just leave for part of July, part of August, and then come back and live their life. Or lake houses are
absolutely
investment for people if they want to spend time.
Yeah, and there's tons of people.
water.
Obviously, we're so close to some big lakes here.
Yeah.
We have tons of people that have lake houses. We have some, not really friends, but people that live down the street from us that have a nice lake house out on Quitman. And one of my kids was over there playing, and they were heading out there for the weekend. So
Yeah.
it's like, oh, it's nice.
Just to
not a huge
get out of the
lake person,
city.
but-
You're not a lake person?
No, I've never really been a huge lake person. There's something about not being able to see in the water. And I don't know about
those
you.
are Texas lakes.
Yes, those are. I don't know California lakes. I don't know about you, but I'm also boaters. Boating. The people who drive boats. I saw a funny comedic skit. They said that only people that drive boats are either 11 years old or drunk. And being on a boat has kind of always freaked me out.
Okay.
I don't mind like a pontoon boat. That's fun. But getting on ski boats out in the middle of a busy lake.
Well, that's true. And when it's busy too,
Yes.
and this is an urban area, there's
Yeah.
I'm not sure about Lake Louisville.
No.
Seems like a party lake.
It is. I did that once. I did it more than once, but the last time I did it, I was like, yeah, I think this is probably my last trip out here. I think I'm good.
It's been a while since I've been on water skis or wakeboard or anything like that. But I have such fond memories growing up, again, in Northern California, with amazing lakes and cooler weather.
Sure.
Of being out with my grandparents and family on ski boats and skiing and
Yeah.
But I haven't really partaken here in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, we got them though. I mean, if that's your
Yeah.
thing, there's ample opportunity within fairly close driving
At the
distance.
end of the day, there's something here for everybody.
I think so.
I've often said if you're willing to drive long enough on Preston Road, you'll find anything you want.
Yeah, it is. Yes,
This is a long road. It covers
is long.
all the city.
It goes very. Yeah, how far?
Almost goes to Oklahoma.
Yeah, I was to say. I think it goes almost to Oklahoma, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can find whatever you're looking for if you're willing to look.
Yeah.
Well, what do you wish I would have asked you?
I don't know. There's nothing I can think of that you should have asked me.
That I would have asked you.
Yeah, I can't think of anything. I wish I had something
One of my
more.
recent guests, Jackie Dorbitz, who you know from our office, she says, the question that you should start asking people is, what's the question you're glad I didn't ask you? And I haven't adapted that one yet into my podcast hosting skills, but it is a funny question to think about.
Has anybody interviewed you?
No, we've talked about having an interview video. I'm looking over here at our video producer because we talked about having him do it later in the year, kind of summarizing some of the lessons learned and different things. But we'll see.
I think
I've been on other people's podcasts though. I have had that opportunity, which has been fun.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it'd be interesting to have it on yours. Talk a little, kind of focus it a little bit on you.
Well, what's the question you would ask me?
Well, I think we'll
save the answer for later.
Obviously, you've probably talked to your audience about your background, your history, where you're from.
Maybe off and on.
So maybe a little bit about that and kind of your, what your passion for this business is and helping people and what you see for, now that you're, a Texan, kind of what you see for North Texas in the future.
Yeah,
like what's the 5-year outlook like here? And obviously real estate related, but also just for the area, the population, what does that look like? 10-year outlook maybe.
I do have opinions on. I have opinions on a lot of things. You're aware of that.
Yeah.
Well, those are some interesting things we can add to our question list for when that day eventually comes.
It will. It's got
Yes. Well, thank you again for joining us. I appreciate your time, and I wish you a prosperous rest of the year.
I appreciate it. It's always great to be here, and I always enjoy it.
Yeah. Thanks, Jared.
Have you been thinking about moving to North Texas? Maybe you're looking in Plano, Dallas, Frisco, or the surrounding communities. Each year, our team helps dozens of families make the move to Texas. We'd love to help you begin your journey. Learn more on our website at hastingsre.com. That's HAISTINGSRE.com.